I didn't just find my husband's secret will. I held it up in court and watched three people I loved flinch: the beneficiary, who'd never met me, my son who'd signed it, and my daughter who'd kept the secret. Right before I handed the judge a brass sunflower key that made the entire document rearrange itself. If you think this ends with me losing my home, count again. The house didn't change hands that day. The family did. By the time I slid that key across the lacquered table and watched a stranger's smile collapse, my hands didn't shake. Everyone else trembled: my son, my daughter, even our family lawyer, but not me. I'd already run my fingers over every secret my husband ever filed away, from the letter that unhooked my faith to the will that gave our life to a woman I had never met. If you're here to judge, you'll need more than a gavel. You'll need patience. Because a 70-year-old grandmother is about to tell you how she dismantled a puzzle everyone else agreed not to solve. I didn't start with the will. I started with the box that had been waiting for me since before the children were born, back when my husband swore he was the most boring man on the eastern seaboard. That man kept everything. Receipts for garden soil. Ticket stubs. Old postcards with no text, only stamps. He claimed it was his historian's habit, a family chronicler's instinct. Now I know better. Archivists are saints only if no one else bleeds in their margins. It was an ordinary June afternoon, the kind that smells of hot paving stones and distant sprinklers. The house had been quiet for a month since the funeral. I couldn't move fast through the rooms yet. Every corner held a shadow that looked like him, and my knees preferred the slowness anyway. I was dusting the bookcase he used for his private papers, private, a word that had always sat well in my marriage, because honesty required walls and windows both, when a folder slid back behind the stacks. I crouched, pressed my palm to the wood, and felt a faint draft. That's when I noticed the sunflower carved into the baseboard, its center darker than the petals. Not carved, fixed. A knob. My husband had built a false panel into the bookcase. It couldn't be true. He wasn't a spy. He was an economist who described risks like weather. He filed reports with titles that made me sleepy, then promptly fell asleep himself in the armchair, one shoe off, one shoe on. He loved blueberry muffins. He laughed softly at anything that threatened to bother anyone. That kind of man does not build doors in his furniture. Yet the sunflower turned. The panel clicked open. Inside lay a shallow compartment lined in felt the color of an old bruise, holding a small brass key on a pink ribbon and a brown envelope with my name on it. For a moment I just watched a tiny parade of dust drift through the light. Then I picked up the envelope. It contained a list. No questions, no explanations, only a list. Archive Box C, attic rafters, north side, behind trunk. Deposit box at First County Bank, code 1974. Call Martin. Tell him to finally stop lying to himself. He knows why. If you found this after I'm gone and you cannot forgive me, take the key anyway. The handwriting was his. The pink ribbon was mine. The ribbon had tied my hair the day I stepped off a bus in 1974, when we were 20 and foolish, and he promised a home with wide windows and a garden. He kept that promise. He didn't promise anything about keys. Grief didn't fog my brain. It sharpened it like a whetstone. I put the key in my pocket. I went upstairs to the attic. Our attic rafters held a kingdom. Quilts the children made in kindergarten, a rocking horse with a crack on one ear, boxes of report cards, 3 lamps that didn't match anything. Behind the old trunk that once belonged to his aunt I found a cardboard carton marked with a letter C and a star. When I pulled it into the light, the top flaked in my hands, the tape giving up after decades of doing its best. Inside were folders numbered with dates and a photograph in black and white. The photograph showed a young woman standing beside a clothesline. She wore a polka dot dress and held a book against her hip. The way she stood, chin tipped in challenge, eyes somewhere past the camera, was familiar and not familiar, the way one can feel related to someone and not know how. The back of the photograph had a single word: Claire. Nothing else in that box explained Claire. There were letters addressed to my husband from his college friend Martin, mostly about job prospects and music. A few receipts from First County Bank. and a thin will, typed and signed 38 years ago, leaving personal effects in box 19 to a beneficiary whose name had been redacted with ink so diligent it was almost a wound. Why was there an old will in my attic? Why was it paired with a woman I'd never met? And why did my husband think he needed to leave himself breadcrumbs to the bank when he had lived 10 minutes from that branch for 30 years? The next morning, I took a cab to First County Bank. I wore my church lady shoes and a cardigan that made me look harmless. You'd be surprised what a harmless-looking woman can accomplish if she knows how to ask. The deposit box manager was new and young, with the kind of smile that suggests corporate seminars. "I'm here about a safe deposit box my husband maintained," I said. "He passed recently, and I found a key." I produced the brass sunflower. She typed. She frowned in a way you learn when frowning isn't allowed. "We do have a box under his name, ma'am, but it's unusual." "Unusual how?" "It's held jointly." My heart knocked against my ribs like it wanted to be let out. "With whom?" "I'll need authorization to disclose that." "You'll find it in the will." "We don't have a copy of the will on file." I set the old will from Archive C on the counter. To her credit, she read it carefully, then took it to a supervisor. 20 minutes later, they escorted me to a room with a small table, the way a library will escort a patron who has requested a book that was never meant to be on general shelves. The manager slid open a metal drawer and set a longer metal box on the table. The sunflower key turned smoothly. Inside, I found a newer will, the paper thick and crisp, authenticated 2 years earlier by the same lawyer who had mopped his forehead at our dining room table last month. I also found a set of photographs carefully wrapped in tissue paper, an ivory comb with a chip on one tooth, and a letter addressed to me in a hand that wasn't my husband's. The letter was written on stationery from St. Melora's home, a care facility an hour outside town. The handwriting had the careful loops of someone who had practiced writing more recently than most. "Dear Eleanor," it began. "I am writing to you because he never did. He came here anyway, for years, and walked our small garden with me at a pace slow enough to forgive everything. I don't know if you can forgive it too. By now, maybe he's left you the truth. Maybe not. He said you like clear skies. The truth is a clear sky that takes the roof away. My name is Claire." I read the letter through once and then again, slower, tracing each sentence as if I could steady my heart by the weight of ink. Claire wrote about being 18 and in love with a man at the wrong time. She wrote about a baby born in secret and surrendered to a cousin, about parents who refused to know, about a hospital admission in her early 30s when her thoughts began to scatter. She wrote about the man who visited every month the same way he paid the electric bill, quietly, without complaint, as if his presence could keep the lights on. She wrote that he had insisted she take an ivory comb the summer she'd cut her hair, a comb she never used, a comb she kept as a small bright thing in a drawer where she could touch it when the noise grew too loud. She wrote that the man changed when he married, grew careful with his words, stamped the dirt off his shoes before entering his own house. "Don't blame him for the mess," Claire wrote near the end. "We made it together long ago, and we were young and selfish, and then we were older and careful. He told me to leave it sealed. Even now, opening it for you feels like dropping plates. But you should have a clean floor. My only request is that you don't blame the children. If they knew to protect you." The second will, my husband's real will, I realized, was dated 24 months before he died. The beneficiary's name took my breath away. Not Claire. Someone else, a woman named Abigail Cross. Everything, our house, the savings, the gold ring his mother had tucked into my palm on our wedding day, transferred to this other woman. There were separate provisions for each of our children, trusts with sums neat and sensible, thoughtful but not extravagant. There was a little money for me, too, bracketed as maintenance for life, phrased as if I were a historic garden he believed belonged to someone else. He left me enough to survive and left away everything else. I pressed my palm to the table and stared at the name. I did not know an Abigail Cross. The will required notarized witnesses and listed two, Martin Gale, my husband's friend, and my son, Daniel. I put the will back into the deposit box like a magician reversing a trick. I selected one photograph from the bundle. It showed my husband on a bench under a large maple tree. A woman sat beside him. She was older than me by a handful of years, her hair cut short. Their hands didn't touch, but their shoulders leaned in, two parentheses around a sentence. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" the manager asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything's finally in its proper place." The walk home felt like crossing a suspension bridge in wind. Truth rattled every cable. But the mind knows how to pick a path. I made tea. I laid the papers out on the dining room table the way you lay out pieces of a quilt. I called Martin. He arrived in less than an hour, wearing the same corduroy jacket he'd worn at the memorial. He had been handsome in his youth, cocky even, but age had gentled his angles. He wrapped his hands around the mug I offered like a penitent seeking heat. "How did you find it?" he asked. "He told me to." He closed his eyes briefly. "I told him not to leave you the chase map." "Then you knew," I said. "You signed this." "I did. And you let my son sign it, too." Martin looked at me for a long time. His eyes had become watery with age, and the weight of that water seemed to pull the truth into his mouth. "He insisted," Martin said. "Your husband thought if Daniel witnessed it, then he could never lie to himself about what had been done." What had been done? The phrase sounded like something pulled from a report, the passive construction built like a wall. "Tell me about Abigail Cross." "I can't," he said. "You can. Or I will ask Daniel." He flinched. "Give me a day." "You had 30 years, I said, and soft did not suit my voice then. "You have an afternoon. Use it." After he left, I waited. I did not tremble. If you've carried babies in your arms in the middle of the night through a house that creaks like a ship, you can weather paperwork. I looked at the photographs again. In several of them, I recognized the garden from St. Melorus, a walkway edged with catmint, a bench under a maple. In one of them, a nurse stood at the edge of the frame with a clipboard, looking over her shoulder like a person obeying and resisting at once. At 5 o'clock, Daniel came by with dinner. He has his father's careful hands. "I made you something," he said, setting a casserole on the counter and taking out plates as if we hadn't eaten at my table 1,000 times, as if he didn't know where everything went. He looked tired, the particular tiredness of a man who has been carrying a bucket that sloshes truth and telling everyone it's water. "Sit," I said. He sat. He reached for the casserole dish, and then he didn't. He looked at me the way he looked at his children before a big game, as if he needed to gauge the weather and choose whether to advise an umbrella. "You signed your father's will," I said. He stared at his hands. "I did." "You knew the beneficiary." He lifted his head. "I know of her." "How long?" My voice wasn't loud. It was not a storm. It was a date on a calendar. It was the exact timestamp on my life turning into something else. "Since I was 17, he said. "Dad took me to lunch and told me about Claire. He said he had made a mistake before he met you and that he would spend his life making sure the mistake didn't ruin anyone. He said we all make messes and that the way you measure a person is whether they clean up theirs quietly." "I'm noticing a theme," I said. "He said we were to keep you safe." "Keep me safe from what, Daniel?" "From being angry." That's when my hands trembled, not from grief, but from laughter that had no humor. "He wanted to keep me safe from my own anger," I said. "And to accomplish that he left our home to a woman I have never met." "It's not like that." "Tell me how it is, then." "Abigail is." He stopped. He swallowed. He found the edge of whatever story he had practiced telling and discovered it cut. "Mom, please just trust me that this is more complicated than it looks. I've been married for 50 years. Everything is more complicated than it looks. Tell me anyway." "Abigail is Claire's daughter," he said. "Which means she is." "My husband's daughter," I finished. The words did not blow the roof off. They were a window opening. Air came in. "How long has he known?" "Since she was 19. Claire's cousin wrote to him. He met Abigail in a library. They kept it quiet. He helped her through school. He set up a fund. He visited Claire at St. Melorus. And the will. He wanted to make sure everyone had a place to live. He believed you would love the people, not the property. He left you money that is yours alone, safe from taxes and safe from anyone's decisions. He wanted the house to go to Abigail because she has 3 children and a job that doesn't pay enough and a landlord who doesn't fix leaks. He thought the house could fix something, that a place can be a bandage when hearts can't be. Did you ever meet her? Once. And you didn't tell me. He started to cry without sound, the way he had cried when he was 6 and had finally confessed to breaking the neighbor's garden angel. I wanted to, he said. But he said to wait. Wait for what? For him to tell you, said a voice from the doorway. I hadn't heard my daughter's car. Hannah came in carrying groceries, efficient as a storm front, and set them on the table as if she hadn't just walked into a conversation that had unseated a continent. She has my face, but better. She set oranges in a bowl. She looked at me. Did you find the deposit box? She asked quietly. I did. She nodded. I thought you would. Mom, we wanted to tell you. Dad was always about to. And then he got sick. And then he got stubborn. And then he got scared. He was terrified of losing you in the last chapter. And he didn't want his daughter to die believing there was no door for her. So he made a door out of the only wood he had. And the beneficiary? I asked. This woman Abigail, who gets the house? Hannah took my hand. She isn't a stranger, even if she is to you. My daughter, who had shared my bathrooms and my clothes and my wedding photos, had looked into my face every holiday and kept her mouth closed. My son, who had put small sticky hands in mine, had sharpened his honesty on his father's secrets. Some tragedies are loud. This one was well-mannered. It wore cardigans and kept receipts. I excused myself and walked into the garden. The light had turned the rose leaves into a kind of stained glass. For a while I watched a bee in the lavender. Truth kept knocking, polite but relentless, the way my husband had been. Finally, I knocked back. I drove to St. Meloris the next morning. A nurse escorted me along a hallway polished to a disciplined shine. The garden behind the building did look like the photos, a path with pavers, a bench under that maple, the catmint nodding like old women at church. A woman sat in a wheelchair by the hedge, wrapped in a blanket in spite of the warmth. She looked up as I approached, and in her eyes I recognized the defiant tilt from the old photograph. Time had written its script across her face, but the handwriting matched. Claire? I asked. She nodded. You must be Eleanor, she said in a voice that had been trained not to tease. I am. I am glad to meet you on a day when neither of us has to pretend the weather is fine. We sat. We did not rush. Birds made polite claims on the air around us. Finally, she said, I asked your husband once why he hadn't told you. He said if he were 18 again, he would knock on every door with the truth in his hands. But he was not 18. He was 60. Age makes you careful. Sometimes careful is a virtue. Sometimes it is offense. Was he happy? I asked. With you, she said. Oh, yes. He loved you as if he were allowed to. That is not a small sentence. And with you? She smiled a little, and her face at that minute looked like a garden in late afternoon, worn, beautiful, purposeful. There are different kinds of happiness, she said. We had the kind that knows a bench, the kind that counts sunlight. I did not need him to be mine to be grateful he was in the world. And Abigail? I asked. Tell me about her. She is stubborn the way trees are stubborn, Claire said. Which is to say she puts her roots down wherever she must and drinks what the ground gives her. She is proud of surviving. She has 3 children who have opinions about everything. She is not careful with her money because she has never been allowed to be. She owns a red coat and wears it when she needs courage. We sat for a while longer. She told me the story of a summer afternoon when my husband had brought her an ivory comb as if it were a monument. She told me about how they would count the birds, 1, 2, 3, and she would pretend they were years, and he would pretend they were mistakes, and then they would pretend they were neither. Before I left, she took my hands, palms together, as if in prayer. Forgive him for being ordinary, she said. It was his best and worst trait. I drove home by a long route, not because I was afraid of what waited, but because I wanted to pick the right door to walk through. Our house is yellow, with white trim, and on that afternoon it looked like honey in a jar. I stood on the sidewalk and imagined it filled with children who didn't know the rules I'd made for the furniture. I imagined my granddaughter from Abigail's side, whatever she looked like, running down the hall in socked feet, sliding on a rug I had always kept straight. I decided that if I was to be angry, it would be at what had hurt, not at what could heal. I called our lawyer. He was nervous on the phone, his words hopping. I told him we were going to revisit the will, and he said that would be difficult, and I said we had the sunflower key, and he stopped hopping. We scheduled a meeting. That evening, the children came around again. They had decided not to let me eat alone for a while. We set out plates. We ate a little. I told them about St. Meloris, about the garden, about Claire's laugh. I told them the part about forgiving ordinary. They looked at me like I had handed them a compass that named their location and only asked them to choose a direction next. Do you want to meet her? Hannah asked softly. She always moved toward solutions like a cat toward a sunny chair. I want to meet Abigail, I said. We met at a cafe that used to be a hardware store, the kind of place that keeps a row of ancient nails in a glass case as a decoration. Abigail wore the red coat, of course. She walked in like a person who knows she's late to every important party and can only hope she is bringing a good dessert. She had my husband's eyes and Claire's chin and a manner that reminded me of myself when I was 30, making lists that could keep a family afloat. You must hate me, she said as soon as she sat down. Do you hate yourself? I asked. Sometimes, she admitted. I do my best not to. I get up. I go to work. I make lunches. I try to pay bills before anyone knocks. Do your children know about their grandfather? I asked. They know a man helped us from far away, she said. They do not know what to call him. What would you like them to call me? I asked. She blinked. I don't understand. The house, the will, I'm not going to fight you for what a judge will call the letter of the law, I said. But I won't let my life be written without me either. I want to make new rules. Not punishments. Not rewards. Agreements. She stared at me, her mouth partway to a laugh or a sob, I couldn't tell which. What kind of agreements? The kind that build a family from strange bricks, I said. Listen. Your children need stability. I need purpose. The house is full of a lifetime of things and a yard that requires the knees of a person who has either little pride or a lot of patience. I have both. I propose this. We put the house in a trust that names us both. I will live there as long as I live. You and your children can move in with me if you like, or you can visit every Sunday. We can host birthdays there. We can fight about where the couch goes. In 10 years, we revisit. In the meantime, we make the will a living thing, not a weapon. Why would you do that for me? She asked. Because someone did not do it for me, I said. Because secrecy is a famine and family should be bred. She began to cry. Not the gentle cinema kind, either. The honest kind that gets in the way of sentences. I passed her a napkin and then a second one. When she had gathered herself enough to look up, I reached across the table and took her hand. It was warm, a practical hand, with a paper-cut healing at the base of one finger. There are conditions, I said. Of course. Number 1. You and the children call me Eleanor. No one calls me Grandma until they want to. Number 2, I will attend every recital, game, science fair, and school play, but if you allow me to clap loudly at the wrong time once, you're not allowed to be embarrassed. Number 3, the first Saturday of every month is for pancakes and lists. We'll plan how to pay for leaky roofs and camp forms. We'll put the list on the fridge and cross things off. There is no rule number 4 yet. We will invent it later. The next months were a lesson in renaming. People at church learned to say, Eleanor's friend and her grandchildren, without twitching. The neighbors adjusted. My children relaxed inch by inch, as if a band around their chests were being loosened. We moved furniture. We painted one wall a color that made the afternoon light look less tired. Abigail and I found that we held different philosophies about the correct location of mixing bowls and the priority of paying off the power bill versus the water bill, but the arguments felt like rain, unavoidable, temporary, and productive. We didn't tell everyone right away. The world doesn't need every detail to behave kindly. But we told enough. We told the people who could help us hold the story when it got heavy. We told Claire every week. She listened with a smile that had bones in it. In December, she pressed my hand and said, "Now you know why a comb can be a monument." I kept the comb on the mantle. For once, the mantle's job wasn't to display what we wanted the world to admire. It had a duty now. The comb made the house look like a promise had been kept. The lawyer did not like the trust idea at first. Lawyers are not accustomed to papers that need to bend. But life is a better negotiator than stubbornness. He drew up documents. We signed them. I slid the brass sunflower key across his table, asked him to file it wherever the bank filed their forgiveness, and watched his face soften into a smile he hadn't expected to make at work. When we held our first pancake Saturday, the children, my children by blood and my children by new names, were loud and messy. They sprayed flour on a cat. They put blueberries in their pockets. We wrote a list in large letters: leak in upstairs bathroom, permission slip for Ava's field trip, interview suit for Michael's job search, RSVP for Hannah's fundraiser, potting soil for the front steps, number for St. Melores to arrange transport for Claire on Easter. We crossed 3 off before we finished breakfast. That is an excellent ratio, I've learned, for a family. Do not mistake me, old habits remain. Some nights I still dream of being the only person in my home. Some mornings I miss the quiet that used to feel like safety and now sometimes feels like a secret closing its mouth. But mostly, the noise is the sound of a machine that knows its work. I planted new roses along the fence. Their names are Gloria and Peace. A little on the nose, I know, but gardens have never been subtle, and neither am I at 70. The last piece of the story arrived the spring after the trust was signed. I drove to the courthouse with a file of documents and a plate of cookies because I have learned that the clerks deserve tribute. In a small conference room with ugly chairs, we sat, me, Abigail, the lawyer, and our judge, a woman with a braid thicker than my wrist. On the other side sat a woman I had once feared and now only pitied, the nurse from the photographs. She had filed to contest the will on behalf of a cousin she said existed but could not name. She spoke in sentences arranged like a chessboard, strategic, precise. The judge listened. Then the judge asked me to speak. I did not talk about betrayal. There had been plenty. I did not talk about outrage. It had been useful sometimes and blinding others. I talked about houseplants and holidays. I talked about grocery lists and the quiet rush of a family passing a bowl of potatoes around a table. I talked about the sound of a key turning in a lock at the end of a day and how safety, like soup, is best when shared. Why should the will stand if the beneficiary did not know the decedent well? The nurse's attorney asked. Because love is not owed only to those who have been seen, I said. Because a man's responsibilities don't vanish when he makes a good choice after a bad one. Because a home can be restitution and a playground. A trust can be both a structure and a kindness. The judge considered us for a while, then nodded. It is the order of this court that the will stands as executed, with the amendments made by mutual consent and codicil, she said. I also encourage all parties to bring cookies to their next family meeting, because this is the best tray of oatmeal raisin I have seen in my courtroom in 5 years. We laughed. The sound sharpened the world into something survivable. When court adjourned, the nurse paused, then approached. You are stronger than I expected, she said, as if it were a diagnosis. I am older than you expected, I replied. It is nearly the same thing. Which brings us back to the sunflower key. When I set it on that conference table, it didn't just unlock a metal box. It opened a room we all needed to walk into. That room had windows. It had light. It did not have a lock anymore. Claire came to the house once after a particularly soft spring rain. The staff helped her up the front steps. She wore a sweater the same green as old limes. Abigail and the children met us on the porch. We showed her the garden. She touched the leaves of the catmint and closed her eyes as if sound were heavy on her eyelids. We sat under the maple, which is a cousin of the one in St. Melores garden. She put her hand on the arm of the bench and patted it as if it were a living shoulder. It is a good bench, she said. It is, I agreed. The children put on a show with a cardboard sword and a scarf and 3 jokes that wouldn't pass inspection in a school assembly. We clapped anyway. When it was time for Claire to go, she asked for the comb, and I brought it to her. She ran her finger along the chipped tooth and smiled. Even beautiful things break, she said. But not the part that makes them beautiful. That summer, we painted the kitchen. In the top of one cabinet, behind the teacups I only use when the bishop visits, I found another small envelope. It was taped to the wood in a hurry. Inside, A single note in my husband's hand. If you have found your way to here, then I have done one thing right. I set the note beside the comb and a photograph of the bench. I put an orange in the bowl because oranges remind me of beginning. Then I made pancakes because families insist on being fed and because making breakfast is a form of prayer even when you have stopped believing anyone is listening. Autumn brought school forms thick as novels. Abigail's oldest, Michael, got an interview for a job with benefits. He and I practiced his handshake at the kitchen table until he rolled his eyes and told me my hand was too firm. "You're going to win the interview and the arm wrestling match," he said. He got the job. We celebrated with cake and old photographs. He found one of his grandfather on a beach holding a kite and asked if he had liked the ocean. He liked anything that took its time, I answered. In winter, the radiator banged like a drum line on a parade route, and we had to wear socks to bed. The children said this was an adventure. The cat disagreed. We drank cocoa. We hosted a game night and let people move the dining chairs however they needed. I hardly winced. At midnight on New Year's Eve, we stood on the porch wrapped in blankets and listened to someone 2 streets over a tempt trumpet. It sounded like a goose. We laughed. There is a very particular joy in hearing that a neighbor believes in talent despite evidence. It means you are not the only one. In spring, we planted tomatoes and lost the first 2 seedlings to an over-enthusiastic soccer ball. This felt like a sign that some parts of life insist on being maintained with tolerance, not rules. The second planting took. We ate tomatoes all summer and discovered that one child didn't like them unless they were chopped with basil. We learned to chop them with basil. Compromise is not weakness. It is a secret door with a sunflower on it. The second spring after the funeral brought a flood of lesser crises, the kind that test a family's joints. The washing machine died with theatrics, making sounds like a ship breaking free of its moorings. I overwatered the jade plant. Abigail undersalted the soup. The cat developed a passion for sleeping exclusively on white laundry. Claire's health dimmed and brightened in a stuttering pattern that forced us to learn new ways to plan and then pivot. Through it all, the trust held, the pancakes persisted, and the list on the fridge took on the comfortable look of a beloved map: creases, notes, coffee rings. One morning in early summer, I heard sharp voices outside and stepped onto the porch to find 2 neighbors, women who had never denied themselves an opinion, hovering at the gate. "We were just saying," one began, glancing at the red coat hung on the hall tree behind me, "that it must be strange to have a beneficiary living in the benefactor's home." "Strange," I said, "like a garden in August, messy and worth it." I smiled, and because I am 70 and tired of confusion disguising itself as concern, I added, "You are welcome to bring a pie or a hammer. We have use for either, but not for commentary." They brought a pie the next day. It was lemon and a little too tart. We ate every slice. We are not a household that refuses a gift because it was late. Martin visited more often as summer ripened. He and I walked the block in the evenings, his hands tucked behind his back like a schoolboy. Once, as a sprinkler hissed and turned in a slow arc on a neighbor's lawn, he stopped. "I should have told you," he said. "You should have," I agreed. He nodded. I was a coward. "You were careful," I said, and then shook my head. "No, that's what you told yourself. You were afraid of losing your place in a story you liked." "Eleanor," he said, "I liked you both." I believed him. That is one of the harder truths to hold, but holding it didn't break me. It steadied me. "What was he like with you, when I wasn't looking?" I asked on another walk. "Quieter," Martin said. "Funny, actually. He had a way of telling a joke like he was apologizing to it for existing. He once wrote a tune on a napkin and said it was the sound of a promise keeping time." "Did he keep time?" I asked. "As best as any man does." We passed the maple and watched the light sieve through it. One evening, as cicadas tuned the air into a chorus, Abigail approached me with a look I had come to recognize, the preface to an uncomfortable truth. "I need to tell you something about Claire's nurse," she said. "The one who filed the contest." "Go on." "She used to work in billing. Years ago. She knew about the monthly payments Dad made to St. Maloris, and when he died, she contacted a cousin who, if he exists only in the way a convenient witness exists. She isn't trying to steal because she hates us. She's doing it because she thinks this is how life is. You see a door, you wedge your foot in it. Then we will close it without closing any others, I said. We met with the lawyer again. Papers shuffled. Words wore ties. In the end, the contest fizzled in the thin air of evidence. But before it did, it gave me the chance to perform one last small ceremony. In that sterile conference room with ugly chairs, under a clock that ticked like a second hand embarrassed for itself, I placed the brass sunflower key on the table between us all and said, "This opened the box that held the will that threatened to make us enemies. I believe it should be the emblem that makes us family instead." I slid it toward Abigail. She pushed it back. "You found it," she said. I slid it to Daniel. He slid it to Hannah. Hannah slid it to me and leaned in. "Keep it," she whispered. "But hang it by the door, not over anyone's head." On the first day of school that fall, Abigail's youngest insisted on wearing a cape under her jacket in case I need to be brave. We tied the cape strings under the jacket collar. At pickup, she marched toward me with a paper crown and a solemn expression. At lunch, "Ella said you are not my real grandma," she reported. I told her she doesn't know how keys work. I knelt and kissed her forehead. "Perfect," I said. "That's exactly right." A month later, Claire slipped quietly, like someone leaving a party through the kitchen so as not to disturb the goodbyes. We gathered in the chapel at St. Melloris, an unassuming room with windows that knew how to be kind to faces. The chaplain spoke briefly and well. I read a passage from a book she had once held on the bench. Abigail's children sang a song off-key with great conviction, and that felt appropriate. After the service, I carried the ivory comb in my pocket and then, on impulse, pressed it into Abigail's hand. "This was your mother's monument," I said. "Take it. Build another." "I can't," she said, but she did. Grief returned that winter, softer than before, like a tide that has learned the shape of the shore. It left behind gifts the way water leaves shells. We learned to say her name lightly and often. We hung one of the bench photographs in the hallway and stopped every now and then to touch the frame as if it were a lintel we needed to bless ourselves beneath. Not everything was hushed and holy. The washing machine saga continued. The cat began bringing us treaties, rubber bands, a paper clip, once, alarmingly, my ATM card. The radiator refused to retire. I taught the children to make pie crust and accept failure as a respectable teacher. Abigail taught me to text with the speed of a teenager and to appreciate coupons as if they were a game we were winning together. At some point in the spring, I started a notebook titled House Gospels, a collection of truths the house had taught us. Truth 1. A closed door is sometimes only a tired hinge. Truth 2. Hospitality is a coat rack with more hooks than you think you need. Truth 3. It is almost impossible to stay angry while making pancakes for 6. Truth 4. If you buy one of anything you use, you will need to by Friday. Truth 5. The thing you think you cannot give away will become the thing that frees your hands. I wrote those down after a day that began with a broken teacup and ended with a new friend. The broken cup had been my mother-in-law's. I had poured tea into it without thinking, and one of the children, arms full of books, clipped it with an elbow. It shattered cleanly, decisively, like a good argument. I swept up the pieces. After dinner, our neighbor knocked, holding a box of saucers. "Estate sale," she said, eyes on the floor as if she had met us halfway and didn't want to overshoot. I thought, maybe you could use them. Or not. I know that sometimes help is not the right size. "It is the right size," I said, and meant it. We drank tea from misfit cups that night and laughed at how ridiculous I had been to hoard the fragile. Spring threatened to become summer again when the house offered us its own confession. In the basement, behind an old wardrobe, we found a narrow closet we had forgotten. Inside was a cedar chest. I knelt, my knees objecting, and pried it open. The scent of cedar rose up like a rehearsal for memory. Inside lay a quilt top my husband and I had started in our first year of marriage and abandoned once babies and bills and campaigns to keep the pantry supplied had rearranged our attention. Triangles, some stitched, some pinned. Colors that had been fashionable and then, because of the stubbornness of lived-in things, fashionable again. "Let's finish it," Abigail said. We did, in bursts. The children learned to thread needles, to respect both the virtue of small straight stitches and the forgiveness of crooked ones. We bled on the fabric more than once. We learned the trick of spitting on a blood spot and rubbing it out with the fabric's own edge. There's a sermon in that, if you're looking. Sometimes the stain obeys only the thing it fell upon. We gave the quilt to the judge who had signed our trust and our codicil. She cried. The clerk cried. I cried a little. We took a photograph that I made the children promise never to post online because I am old-fashioned and because I have learned that some circles widen best in private. Michael, now Mr. Cross to a suite of coworkers, thrived at his job. He bought a tie that looked expensive but was not, and then bought another one in a sensible pattern after I told him the first made him look as if a board game had exploded. Ava joined a science club and filled the kitchen with small experiments that fizzed and foamed and once turned my wooden spoon a shade of blue I have not seen in nature. The littlest asserted herself as the family archivist, labeling boxes with decisive handwriting and hiding notes under the couch cushions for future archaeologists. Once in a while, I visited the bank just to say hello to the manager who had handed me the metal box that changed everything. We developed a ritual. She would bring out a bowl of wrapped candies, I would take one, and we would reminisce about the day a sunflower key introduced us. She confided that she had gotten married. I confided that I was learning to cook vegan on Thursdays for the sake of a grandchild's conscience. We traded recipes and the kind of small confidences that bridge years between strangers. On an afternoon that smelled like rain even though none appeared, I sat at the kitchen table, the sunflower key hanging from a small nail by the back door, and took stock. The house was louder than it had ever been. The mortgage was paid. The trust sat on the lawyer's server like a patient staircase. The garden forgave my neglect because I had learned to forgive its insistence on weeds. My son called on Saturdays and came on Sundays. My daughter texted photographs of sunsets and shopping lists. Abigail sent me calendar invites for school plays and insurance appointments. Nothing was easy. Everything was possible. That night, I dreamed of my husband. We were neither young nor old in the dream. We were simply the size of ourselves. He handed me the ivory comb and said, I should have told you the day I bought this. You should have, I said. He nodded. You did it anyway. I woke up before dawn, sat on the edge of the bed, and watched the sky negotiate with itself. When morning finally won, I went downstairs, turned on the oven, and started a batch of muffins. Blueberry, of course. He would have liked that. We all did. On my 70th birthday, we filled the house. People brought potted herbs and cakes with frosting roses. The children snuck icing. Someone put on a record, and the needle scratched and then found its groove. My son gave a speech that was also an apology and also a thank you. My daughter handed me a tiny gift. Inside was a key charm shaped like a sunflower, threaded on a chain. I don't need a key anymore, I said, my voice thick. It's not for opening anything, she replied. It's to remind you that you know how. When the last guest left and the cat resumed his patrol of the countertops, I stood alone in the kitchen and listened to the house breathe. The radiator clicked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car door closed and a voice called good night. I looked at the brass sunflower key by the back door, our small standard, and felt a kind of steadiness I had not known in years. People believe that a will is a verdict. I know now it's a first draft. It tells you what someone intended in the shape of legal sentences. The living write the revisions. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you find a key with a flower on it, and it opens not a box, but a circle, one that widens to fit another chair and another name and another pair of hands willing to wash dishes at the end of the night. A year later, we dedicated a bench in the park near St. Meloris, not for a cemetery's particular solemnity, but for the ongoingness of a place where children run and old women feed birds and lives weave in and out of each other, sometimes with friction, sometimes with grace. The plaque reads, For Claire, who waited on a bench. For Abigail, who wore a red coat when courage was required. For Eleanor, who turned a key and found a door. We sat there after the little ceremony, our family and the judge and the bank manager and Martin and a couple of neighbors who had brought lemon bars as if to prove redemption likes sugar. I watched Abigail tuck her hair behind her ear the way I do when I'm thinking. I watched the children attempt cartwheels and negotiations with equal intensity. I watched the light passing through leaves as if it had found its work for the day and was content. Do you ever miss the quiet? Abigail asked. Sometimes, I said. It had its uses. And now? Now I know the difference between silence and secrecy, I said. Silence is a room where you rest. Secrecy is a room where the windows are painted shut. I like windows that open. She smiled. Me too. When it was time to go, the littlest tugged my sleeve. Will you tell me the story again? She asked. Which one? I said, hefting the bag of leftover lemon bars and the folded program from the bench dedication. The one where you lost the house and kept it. I said. That one. We walked toward the car, the bench behind us, the key warm against my palm in the pocket of my coat. I began at the beginning, which is to say I began in the middle, where most true stories start. I didn't just find your grandfather's secret will, I told her. I held it up in court and watched 3 people I loved flinch right before I handed the judge a brass sunflower key that made the entire document rearrange itself. And as I spoke, the wind lifted.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video, like and subscribe. Bye bye!